Hello, my name's Emma and I'm the Education Officer for Westmill Sustainable Energy Trust. Thank you for choosing to use our video presentation. This first slide is really for anybody who's presenting this video. I just wanted to let you know that you can find associated documents on our website at this link. These include a lesson plan, a delivery guide. Now that will enable you to give children a little bit more detail and background and answer further questions. There's also some further points for discussion there as well. Worksheets, these can be printed off. There's a black and white version as well as a colour version, and there's also one that's fillable, so you can download it and save it and then have it filled on a laptop or tablet. And there's worksheet answers as well. On most slides that you will see that there are questions highlighted in orange. There are also some other questions that I'll ask throughout the presentation. Do please feel free to pause the presentation after any question. I'll try and leave a short gap so that children who are watching the presentation on their own have a chance to think about their answers. However, please pause it at any time that you feel it will be useful for children to deliberate or discuss their answers. There are also tasks throughout the presentation, and this is another opportunity to pause it and then give them an opportunity to fill in the worksheets that are associated with the presentation. But do please feel free to pause it at any time. So let's get started. Welcome to Lesson 4, Wind Energy. In this lesson we're going to look at how wind's been used historically, how to measure wind speed and wind direction, and we're going to learn more about wind as a renewable energy source, looking at turbines, how they're made and how they work. So let's make a start. We may think of it as just weather, but it's actually really interesting to think about the role that wind plays in our lives. I wonder if you can imagine waking up on a really windy day in the school holidays. Have a think, and then, if you would, please make a list of 5 activities that you think you could do on a windy day. I hope you've had a chance to have a think. In the past, windy days were always wash days. That was so that after people had washed their clothes and sheets and so on, they would have a chance to dry them in the wind on the line. In fact, it's still a great free way of drying clothes. And you're not using energy by turning on the tumble dryer. But a wash day is really more of a chore than an activity. So what activities have you thought of? Well, here are some. Now, I've never been sailing, but if you live by the coast or by a lake, that might be something you might want to get involved with. Again, if you live by the sea or you've been to the seaside on holidays, you might have noticed that the surf gets much wilder on a windy day. What about sail biking? Again, that's something I've never done, but I believe it involves a 3-wheeled bike or tricycle, which is recumbent, so you're laying back and you've got a large kite or sail at the front which pulls you along the beach or anywhere with a wide expanse of land. Sounds exciting. What about just flying kites? It's relatively expensive. In fact, you can make your own kite. And it's a good way of learning about wind direction too, which is something we're going to look at later. And there's kite surfing, similar to sail biking really, although this time you're on a surfboard, so you've got the added excitement of being on the sea. There's windsurfing too. A bit like sailing, but you stand up on a board. Or, like me, you could just go for a walk and enjoy the feeling of the wind and the sound of it. One of the things we mentioned was flying kites, and the picture here is a really nice example of the wind's energy being harnessed for just that activity. So looking in that picture and thinking about the activities we've mentioned, can you remember what type of energy wind energy is? Well, the key thing to think about is movement. So wind energy is kinetic energy, and kinetic energy is the energy of movement. The wind can be both gentle and also very dramatic. and as such it has inspired musicians and artists and poets. When wind is forced to move through and around structures, whether they're natural like trees or man-made like buildings, it transforms from kinetic energy into sound energy. You may have heard the term the whistling of the wind. But even though we can often hear the wind, we can't see the wind. And that's what inspired this poem by Christina Rossetti, Who Has Seen the Wind? Who has seen the wind? Neither I nor you, but when the leaves hang trembling, the wind is passing through. Who has seen the wind? Neither you nor I, but when the trees bow down their heads, the wind is passing by. The poem paints a nice picture, and it just goes to show that although we can't see the wind, we can actually see the impact of its kinetic energy. Another reason that many poets and writers are inspired by the wind is that there are a lot of words associated with it. Can you think of many words associated with the wind? There are lots, aren't there? But just a few I can think of would be breeze, blowy, gusts, gale, storm, hurricane, draft, tornado. There are lots. I'm sure you thought of some better ones too. Another great thing about the wind is that it's a renewable resource. So it's free to use, but it's also sustainable, which means we're not going to use it up. If we're going to harness the wind's energy, we need to understand and be able to measure things like its direction and its speed. There are tools that we can use to indicate wind direction, things like windsocks and weather vanes that are also called wind vanes. But when do you think it might be important to know the direction of the wind? Well, if you were sailing or windsurfing and knew the direction of the wind, it could help you decide how to place your sail. Or if you're a pilot and you know the direction of the wind, this can help you make a safer landing. Or if you were thinking about siting a new windmill or even wind turbines, knowing the direction of the wind can help you position them so that you get best advantage of the energy of the wind. Now, we've actually been using wind energy to supply energy for thousands of years. And I wonder if you know how we've used wind power in the past and also how it's still used today. Well, windmills were used to create mechanical energy. For example, they were used to grind cereals to make flour or to supply mechanical energy to pump water. Some windmills are even functioning to this day. Also, for centuries, the wind has been used and harnessed to propel boats and ships. Like we've mentioned, these would have used sails to catch the wind. Wind turbines are used today to generate electrical energy. And wind energy is a hugely important renewable energy source for the UK. We've also already discussed all the sports and activities that harness the wind. One tool that we can use for indicating wind direction is a weather vane, also called a wind vane. You may have seen these. They're often found on church spires, clock towers, on old buildings like old schools or agricultural buildings. Because of their position, they were often very decorative or ornate. Weather vanes were traditionally made by blacksmiths, who used steel or cast iron. The arrow at the top of the vane sits on a pole which runs freely inside the tube and the lower fixed part. The lower part has directional indicators on it. What directional indicators do you usually find on a weather vane? As you can see in the picture on the right, we've got 4 letters, NSWE. These stand for North, South, East and West, and are the cardinal points of the compass. If you look at a compass, you will also see what are called the intercardinal points. These don't feature on the weather vane, but they can be useful for finding more accurate direction on a compass. These are southeast between south and east and is denoted by SE, southwest, SW, northwest, NW, and northeast, NE. If you look at the weather vane, you can see that the arrow has a large flat tail, and this is what enables it to be propelled by the wind. Windsocks are also used for measuring direction, but these tend to be used at airports or airfields. I wonder if you've seen a windsock. What features of the design of the windsock make it easy for a pilot to spot? There are a few factors. They're usually pretty large and high up on a pole. They're also usually bright neon orange, which is a colour that doesn't occur naturally, so it stands out against grass and tarmac and so on. And they usually have wide white stripes. All these things make them stand out. Let's see if you can remember those directional indicators by having a go at task 1, points of a compass. If you'd like to press pause to allow time to complete task 1 on the worksheet, do so now. You can then press play to continue watching the presentation. So we asked you to have a look at the compass below and identify the cardinal points. That's north, south, east and west. I wonder how you did. Let's have a look. We've got north at the top there and south opposite. And these two are often the tricky ones. East on the right and west to the left opposite. Now we've challenged you to see if you can label the intercardinal points and remind you these are midway between each cardinal point. I wonder how you did with that. There's northeast, southeast, southwest and northwest. Well done if you got those. It's also hugely important for us to be able to measure the speed of the wind. Now here's a word for you. Wind speed is measured using an anemometer. It takes some saying. There are various types of anemometer, but for scientific measuring, cup anemometers are commonly used. You can see one on the right. They're held up into the wind and the force of the wind blows into the cups, and this causes them to rotate around a central spindle. Trained scientists can then take measurements from this. At Westmill we use smaller digital anemometers. These are also held into the wind but are slightly easier to read with a digital readout. Perhaps when you come and visit us you'll be able to have a go. In many cases, safety is dependent on knowing the speed of the wind. In sailing and shipping, what unit of measurement is used for wind speed? The unit of measurement used is knots, and that's knots with a K, K-N-O-T-S.
When air moves, it's what we call wind. Although we cannot see wind, we can feel it and see it blow leaves, flags, and washing that has been hung out to dry. Winds are changeable, but some are more predictable than others. Weather forecasters try to work out where wind will blow and what weather the wind will bring. They are most interested in wind direction and wind speed. A wind vane is used to show wind direction. It is placed on top of a building or a large pole called a mast, and the wind causes it to move and point in the direction that the wind is coming from. For describing wind direction, we use compass points: north, east, south, and west. Wind direction is the direction wind is blowing from, not where it is blowing to. Therefore, if wind comes from the east, we call it an easterly wind. At an airport, you may see wind socks. They are also used to show wind direction, but they show where the wind is moving to. It is also useful to know wind speed. To measure this, we use an instrument called an anemometer, which looks like this. The faster the wind, the more quickly the cups on the anemometer spin around. It is important to know the speed of a wind. The faster it is, the more damage it can do. We have different words to describe how fast a wind is blowing. A gust is a sudden rush of wind which can catch you by surprise. A gale is a very powerful wind. It can be hard to stand up in a gale, and it's best to stay indoors.
It's interesting, isn't it, that when we talk about wind direction, that's actually the direction the wind is coming from and not where it's going. We talked earlier about the importance of knowing the direction of the wind if we were siting a new wind turbine or wind farm. Well, I'm guessing some of you have already been thinking, how can you do that? Because the wind changes direction all the time. Well, what we do is we use something called the prevailing wind. And this is the wind direction that's most usual, most common in a particular place. For example, the wind turbines at Westmill run east to west, and this is to make the most of the kinetic energy from prevailing southwest winds. Now, despite their fantastic ability to transform kinetic energy into electrical energy, wind turbines are actually quite simple structures. If you look at the picture on the right, we have a tall tower. Then we have 3 blades and they go into a central hub. Behind this hub is a housing called a nacelle, and this is where all the working parts are. A modern wind turbine should have a lifespan of around about 20 to 25 years, and they're also relatively low cost to run. So I wonder if you can remember why wind energy is considered a sustainable renewable energy. Well, the wind is free, and whilst it isn't constant, in the UK it's a pretty reliable resource that isn't going to run out. With a structure as big as a wind turbine, I wonder if you can think how they're kept in good working order. Well, you might be surprised to know that they're actually relatively low maintenance. At Westmill, scheduled maintenance takes place twice a year, and the maintenance engineers can access the working parts inside the nacelle via a ladder system inside the towers. Our turbines are also monitored remotely by a company in the northeast. We're going to look at the parts of the turbine in more detail. You can see on the right we've got a diagram which is numbered, so let's go through these from the bottom. Starting with the concrete foundations. These need to be deep and wide enough to anchor the turbine in high winds. Then we've got the transformer. Now the generator in the turbine produces AC or alternating current. Remember, this has to get from the turbine to a substation and then ultimately into our homes, a process called transmission. Now, higher voltages lose less energy during transmission, so the transformer in the wind turbine is there to increase the voltage for transmission. The next part is the tower, which is a hollow metal structure made from sheet steel sections, and these are bolted together to create that tube that tapers at the top. Inside, we have cables and access ladders. The cables convey the electricity to the transformer, and the access ladders allow maintenance engineers to access the nacelle at the top. At number 5, we've got something called the yaw system. Now this system is situated between the wind turbine, the nacelle and the tower. Now this system is in place to ensure that the wind turbine is producing maximum output by pivoting the nacelle so that the rotor hub is facing into the wind. So the yaw system is really a pivoting system. Next we have the casing, which is called the nacelle. Now we've mentioned this previously, and this houses all the working parts and protects them from the weather. It also contains a controller that starts and stops the turbine depending on the conditions. Number 7 is the generator. This is the working part which converts rotational mechanical energy into AC, alternating current electricity. At number 8, very importantly, we have the wind vane and anemometer. See, I had trouble saying it. These measure the wind speed and direction. Next, we have the drive shaft and gearbox. The shaft is driven by the rotation of the blades, and that turns the gears, which speeds up the RPM, or revolutions per minute. Not all turbines are fitted with a gearbox. Importantly, we then have a brake system. This ensures that if the wind speed gets too high, the turbine can be switched off. We then have 3 rotor blades. These are a little bit like aeroplane wings, and the pitch or angle of the rotor blades can be adjusted depending on loading and desired speed. The pitch is controlled in the rotor hub that we'll come to in a minute, and there's a fail-safe in place. So if the wind speed goes over 50 miles per hour, the blades feather. This means they turn their edges into the wind, and the pitch is adjusted to reduce load and stop the turbine rotor from turning. So now we have the rotor hub, and this is where the pitch control system is contained. And that is covered by a protective nose cone, which is like an aeroplane really. The nose cone streamlines the turbine and makes it more aerodynamic. It also protects the rotor hub. So now we've looked at the different parts of a turbine, let's have a look at how they work. First of all, the wind needs to pass around the rotor blades, which causes a rotational force, and this turns the rotor, providing mechanical energy. This then drives the drive shaft, which turns a generator in the nacelle and produces electrical energy or electricity. The electricity flows down cables into the transformer where the voltage is raised, and then flows into the substation and ends up in our homes. I wonder if you can think how the shape of the blades affects the efficiency of the turbine. So a flat rectangular blade is not the most efficient shape. Therefore, most turbine blades are wider near the axis around which they turn at the top, so that's the hub, and narrower towards the tip. They're also set at an angle against the force of the wind, which is greater at the top, near the nacelle, and shallower at the tip. And these factors create something called an aerofoil, very much like an aeroplane wing, and it's the most efficient aerodynamic form.
They rise up to 100 meters above the ground. The diameter of the rotor is equally large. The windmills are grouped together in farms, in locations with steady winds, on land or at sea. The power of the wind is transferred via a drive shaft and gearbox to a generator. The current is transported down the tower, transformed to high voltage, and sent onto the power grid and on its way to power homes and businesses. Luckily, the wind always blows somewhere in the world. There is no end to the amount of renewable, pure energy it can give us.
So let's see what you remember by doing task 2, parts of a turbine. Once again, if you'd like to, you can press pause to allow time to complete the task, and then press play to continue. So we asked you to match the descriptions on the post-its with the relevant parts below, and they've got names and also a little picture to help you out. So the first one's been done, but let's talk through that together. This streamlines the turbine, making it more aerodynamic, and also protects the rotor hub, so that there is the nose cone. So let's see number 2. These need to be deep and wide enough to anchor the turbine in high winds. Concrete foundations. These can be pitched or feathered in high winds, depending on the wind speed. That's got to be the rotor blades, This measures the wind speed. You all know that's the anemometer. This turns the nacelle so that the rotor hub is facing into the wind. The yaw system, that strange name. This converts rotational mechanical energy into electricity. That's the generator. And finally, this houses all the working parts and protects them from the weather. And that's the nacelle. Well done if you got all of those, because some of them have very challenging names. So we've talked in previous lessons a little bit about the difference between onshore wind, that's wind turbines sited on land, and offshore wind, those that are sited out at sea. Interestingly, onshore wind at a good site, just like ours at Westmill, is still currently the cheapest form of renewable energy available. However, in recent years, the UK government has been investing in offshore wind. Offshore wind farms are more expensive to set up. However, our knowledge of the technology, materials, construction and installation processes is growing fast, and the price is starting to come down. What's more, offshore wind turbines tend to be more efficient because the wind speed is much higher out at sea. What other benefits do you think there are of installing wind farms offshore at sea? As we said, winds at sea tend to be stronger, but also more consistent and less turbulent. So this means there's nothing at sea to block the wind, like mountains or hills or trees. The wind doesn't have to find its way around cities of skyscrapers at sea. Also, and importantly, larger wind farms can be built with less aesthetic impact. Aesthetics are what something looks like. So if wind farms are built at sea, well away from where people are living, there tends to be less objection. Just to show how important wind is as an energy provider, in the first quarter of 2020, renewables accounted for a record 47% of UK generation, and of that, wind made up a whopping 30%. Impressive. I think it's really important to say that new technologies are rarely perfect. There is a cycle of testing, learning and developing that goes into making a better and more efficient product. Wind turbines are no exception to this, but having said that, there are quite a lot of myths around wind power. Now, a myth is a story or a belief, but it isn't necessarily based on fact. People are often afraid of new things, and as I've said, new things don't always work first time. So there has been some negative publicity around wind farms and wind turbines. So I think it's really important to address these. In the next few slides, we're going to look at some of the things that people say and worry about. Things like that they're harmful to birds, that they're noisy or ugly, and that they take a lot of energy to build. I wonder if you have any particular worries about wind turbines. It's good to discuss any concerns you have, and hopefully the next few slides will help with that. So let's start by looking at birds and wind turbines. Now this one's really important to me. I'm fascinated by birds, and it should be really important to all of us. The RSPB and other charities and organisations have been heavily involved in the building of onshore wind farms, and are now working with offshore too. It has been clear that wind turbines are built away from birds' migration paths. So these are paths that we know large groups of birds use on a regular basis. Of course, birds are still free to fly where they wish to, and so they may well come into areas where there are wind farms. However, they also have natural abilities to avoid structures. I think we have to be really honest and acknowledge that there will be some casualties. A bird might fly into a turbine. What's really important though is to put this into context. That turbines are statistically less harmful to birds than buildings or vehicles. Now, we've been putting up buildings and driving vehicles for a very long time. And we should also be worried about their impact on bird life. But it's really important to say that the number of birds either injured or killed by wind turbines is very low indeed. To be sustainable, of course, renewable energies should be able to live happily alongside wildlife without doing significant harm. And of course, another big bonus for the birds is that wind energy doesn't cause the pollution that something like processing coal would. Another thing a lot of people worry about is the noise. Now, this is something you really need to come to the site and see for yourself, but you can also hear it a little on some of the videos that we have online, for example our virtual tour. I was amazed when I first stood under a wind turbine. They're actually much quieter than you might think, and also new technology that keeps developing means that the latest turbines are even quieter still. Do you think you can hear a conversation while standing right under a rotating wind turbine? Well, even when standing right underneath the turbine, it's easy to hear someone talk without them having to raise their voice. In fact, you're more likely to be drowned out by the noise of the wind itself. Some people say wind turbines are ugly, but this is subjective. That means it varies from person to person. It's a matter of our own opinion. Interestingly though, in surveys, more people liked the appearance of wind turbines than disliked them. At Westmill, we think that our wind turbines can be viewed as elegant symbols of a sustainable future, so a positive thing, and therefore they have a beauty. It's also sometimes interesting to think about and discuss other existing structures that we just accept. What about things like pylons? Do we think they're ugly? We tend to accept them because they've been necessary and good for us. They've brought us electricity. So, actually, seeing what something does for you can make you view it in a different way. People also talk about the costs and the energy used in producing or manufacturing turbines and in their construction. When we talk about turbines, what do you think is meant by the term payback? The energy payback time, or EPBT, is the time it takes for the turbine to generate the same amount of energy it took to produce the whole system. This is called embodied energy. And as an example, our turbines at Westmill generated enough energy in their first year to pay back the energy used and the CO2 produced in their manufacture. I think that's a great video of construction at the West Mill site. It's fascinating to see the process and how well all the sections fit together. It's amazing really to think that all 5 turbines were sited and fully constructed in just 8 days in 2008, and that they were up and running straight away. The potential for wind power is huge, and the more energy from wind that we can generate, the less we need to rely on non-renewables like oil and gas and coal. Like I said before, wind generation technology has developed enormously and continues to do so. In fact, each of the new mega-turbines planned for the world's biggest offshore wind farm at Dogger Bank in the North Sea will reach 220 metres and will generate enough electricity for 16,000 homes. That's each turbine. So, what do you think makes the UK particularly well placed to harness wind power? Interestingly, the UK is said to have the best wind resource. In other words, it's the windiest place in Europe. And this means we don't necessarily have the strongest, but we do have the most frequent wind, and this is ideal for wind farms. Now, we're an island, so we have a lot of coastline, and actually the west coast is most ideally suited as winds arrive unimpeded from the Atlantic. This means they don't have to go around anything, they have a clear run. However, in many areas there, the sea is just too deep to locate turbines, so for this reason, offshore wind turbines are also located in suitable parts along the length of the east coast too. It's really important to think about the potential of wind energy, not just in terms of what it can do for us in the UK. William Kamkwamba's story is an excellent example of the difference that innovation and just a single wind turbine can make to a community. The village where he grew up in Malawi was off-grid. In other words, they didn't have access to any mains electricity. Due to this lack of electrical power, they had lots of problems, not just with everyday life, but also with their farming. And when they relied on it, things like the failure of crops could bring more extreme problems like famine, where they simply could not produce enough for the community to eat. William was simply not prepared to stand by and watch these things happen to his family and his community. And, inspired by things he had learned at school about science and even a bit about engineering, he was really determined to find a way of solving this problem. He wanted to find a way of powering pumps so that he could pump water to irrigate or feed the crops. So, amazingly, he planned and built a windmill completely from scratch. In what ways do you think a wind power could impact a village that previously had no access at all to electricity? Well, it could seriously improve quality of life. Things like safety, for example, powering electric lighting so people could see what they were doing safely. Access to information and learning, so you would be able to power things like radios and computers. Greater access to water, allowing them to power things like pumps and irrigation systems, and even things like food storage because they could power fridges. William's story is a really inspiring one, and it fully shows the potential of wind power and how wind energy can make a huge difference. So much so that his story was made into a feature film, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, in 2019. If you're looking for something to do this weekend, I strongly recommend it.
I built the first windmill in 2002. I was 14 years old. When I started building the windmill, a lot of people in my area thought that I'm going crazy. Now, a lot of them, they are just appreciated that you can generate electricity through wind, and then most of them, they also want me to help them to build a windmill. time I started building the windmill. It was the time when I dropped out of school because my parents didn't have any money to send me to school because of the hunger that we are experiencing in the particular year. But I saw the picture of the windmill in the book. Even though the book, they didn't describe what you can do to build that windmill. So I was just using the pictures, and then seeing the picture said that the windmill can pump water and generate electricity. Pump water for me meant irrigation for a second crop. I say, if I can build this windmill, then I can be able to solve this problem we are facing. So the way I did it, I went to a junkyard where I collected all my pieces of the windmill, and then after I put them together, I was able to bring everything together, and then I was building it. I built the windmill to generate electricity for my parents' house. Because before the windmill, we were using a kerosene lamp, which most of the time was causing smokes, and then the smokes were causing coughing, we were getting sick frequently. So after I built the windmill, we were using the lights from the windmill, and then there weren't any more coughing in the family. For me, I think that to build the windmill is really easier. Yeah, I don't think it's difficult.
So, William Kamkwamba said that it wasn't difficult to build a turbine. But let's see if this is true by having a go at task 3, the turbine challenge. Now I'm going to talk you through this a little bit, but it can be done at school or at home, and most of the materials you need should be readily available anywhere. You can often use rubbish or recycled materials. This will be what we call a prototype, which is really a working model. And we're asking you to design and make a wind turbine to provide the power to lift a paper cup off the floor. So, a few things. You can use as many or a few materials as you need. Those might be ones you've been provided with at school or ones you found at home. You can choose the number or the pitch of your rotor blades. Some turbines use 3 blades, some 4. There are even some around with just 2. And remember, pitch means the angle of the blades. And finally, you will rig up your cup and use a wind source, a really good one is a hairdryer, to test your design. So, things you'll need. Well, if you can get together some scissors, maybe some glue and some tape, that's a good idea. Then you want a pencil for drawing out your ideas, but also a pencil makes an excellent drive shaft. Blue tack or plasticine can be great for mounting the blades onto the pencil drive shaft. And then you want to look for things like recycled cardboard. Toilet roll tubes can work well, or anything you've got left over really. I suggest you draw your ideas out first before you start making. And then when you do start making, just make sure that you have an adult on hand if you're using sharp scissors, and especially if you have a glue gun if you're using that. Remember, it's very easy to burn yourself on those, so just be careful. So let's see how you get on. You'll see that there's a space on your worksheet for you to plan your design. And for any adults helping, you'll find that on the worksheet answer sheet there are photographs and more information about how to build this windmill. Once it's completed, we're going to rig it up on a table or a desk. This can simply be done by mounting the end of the pencil drive shaft or whatever you've used onto the table, but loosely, by using 2 strips of paper that are taped over the pencil but are not attached to the pencil. This means that when the pencil or drive shaft turns, it can do so freely. And to test it, we're going to be attaching a piece of string to the other end near the blades, and we're going to attach the other end of the piece of string to a paper or plastic cup or something of an equal weight if you haven't got one of those. As I said, to power your wind turbine, you need a source of something simple like a hairdryer, something that will blow air. You can then propel the turbine and see if it's able to raise the cup off the ground. I hope you enjoy having a go at this. Press pause now to allow yourself time to complete the task, and then when you're ready to test it, press play to continue. Now, the important thing to say here is that there isn't really a wrong or a right solution. This activity is all about just having a go, playing around with materials and seeing if you can get something to work. So I made something fairly quick and fairly simple. I'm sure yours are more exciting than this, but I'll just show you what I did. So this shows that I used 2 lollipop sticks because I had them lying round. Now I've got a drill at home, so I was able to drill a hole and glue them together, giving myself 4 blades. And then I mounted those blades onto a pencil, which was my drive shaft. Next, I found some old luggage tags, and these are just paper tags. They usually have a string on them, so I took the string off and I used these as my blades, and I folded them so that I could find the optimum pitch or angle. Once I'd tied the string really securely around my drive shaft pencil, I then used a hairdryer. You could also use a fan, but I simulated the wind with a hairdryer, and that caused the blades to turn. And actually, once I'd found the right angle, it worked pretty well. Because the string was tied tightly around the pencil, it then allowed the string to be wound, I can't say it, the drive shaft, and it raised the cup off the ground. Now I should say that instead of holding mine onto the table using loose paper straps, I actually made what we call a holding jig. And I did this by getting an offcut or a scrap piece of wood and drilling a hole in it just a tiny bit larger than the pencil. And that then enabled me to put the drive shaft pencil through it and clamp the wood to the table and use that. And I did this because I wanted to use it again to test some different designs. And the following video shows some girls at school having a go with a similar project, and they've got several different outcomes that it's worth having a look at.
This is our windmill, Bravo, made out of pencils and pieces of paper. So I'm going to put blow dryer air on wind on it. Kind of faster, you guys. The way that Megan and I could have improved our experiment is by lengthening the papers to go all the way down the pencil, so it would have created more energy and made it go faster. So fast. There it is. I'm Amelia, and this is Caitlin, and we put together our own little wind turbine. Okay, here it goes. After Caitlin and I's experiment, we decided that one way to improve our creation was that if we think that it is very heavy, and to make it go faster, we would try and remove the cardboard and put in a lighter substance in.
Well, thank you for doing this lesson on wind energy. We've learnt a lot today. I wonder what you can remember about the lesson. So, is wind energy renewable or non-renewable energy? That's right, it's renewable energy. That's because we're never going to use it all up. Can you name 2 devices used to show wind direction? A windsock and also a weather vane or wind vane. An anemometer is used to measure what? It's used to measure wind speed. On a wind turbine, what is the casing which houses all the working parts called? It's a tricky word, this. It's called a nacelle. What term do we use to describe the time it takes for a turbine to generate the same amount of energy it took to manufacture and construct it? Well, we call this energy payback time, or EPBT, but if you put payback, that's good. And finally, what term is used for wind turbines located at sea? These are called offshore wind turbines. Well done if you answered all of those, or even some. That was good work. It's been a long lesson, and I really hope you'll join us in the next lesson, Lesson 5, which is about solar power.